We are here today to talk about partnering for limitless scale. This is the 10x time, right? To talk about how we 10x. And we think one of the best ways to 10x is to get rid of that part of your procurement life that everybody seems to hate the most, your tail spend. It's the usually 70 to 80% of vendors that are 3 to 5% of your spend. These are the ones that cause a lot of problems, and by addressing this little segment, you can really move the needle. So I have with me Martin Ward, joined from Roche, one of our clients who is gracious enough to come speak with me on stage. So Martin, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Martin Ward. I'm a digital enablement manager at Roche in our digital team in procurement.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
We'll get to the next one. So my name is Jeremy Lappin. I'm the founder of Candex. We started Candex a really long time ago, but we really sort of took off about 6 years ago, and Roche was one of our earlier clients. Excited to talk a little tail spend. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Martin.
Thanks. So a few bits about Roche. So we're a big global pharma, top 2. We employ about over 100,000 people around the world. 70 billion in turnover, and we spend one of the largest budgets in R&D in the world, actually, about over $16 billion. So we're big, and this is important actually for our story. We're big, we're complicated, so you can imagine everything that entails. We're based in Basel in Switzerland, and we have 2 divisions, diagnostics, pharmaceuticals. We also trade under different brands and divisions, so Roche, Chugai in Japan, and Genentech in the US. And so what gets us up in the morning, like many farmers, but this is our way of putting it, is doing now what patients need next, as in investing in the R&D that will get the outcomes through the products that they need. So that's just a bit about Roche itself. So if we go to the next slide, a bit about procurement at Roche. So we have a global procurement team, centralized system with global governance, policies and procedures, and we manage around 18 billion in third-party spend. We have a regional and divisional execution, so regional empowerment for compliance and for efficiency, which are important, very important, and we'll get back to that. And also we have a customer approach to some of the divisions. In digital procurement, we lay a very big emphasis on innovating in the market and working with organizations such as yourself at Candex. And we have what we call a best of both strategy. What that means, in short, is building on the suite that we have, which is GEP, you can see there on the right. So we have an ecosystem that we've built around it, and we want to get the best of both, best of the suite, best of the point solutions that we brought in order to support that. We do a lot of co-development with startups, and we'll go back to that with Candex. This is something we did. And we invest a lot in procurement technology, time, effort, into speaking to the market. We also focus on user experience and simplicity. That's what we think are core drivers in terms of getting our end users within the business to use the solutions that we put in place for them. So that's just to set the scene. So our tail spend challenge. So what we wanted to do was to enable stakeholders to engage with small firms, one-time usage, in a way that really minimizes the effort and the volumes, yet did not drive too much work for us on our side. And this is the size of the problem. 80% of the vendors are getting 3 to 5%. So it's pretty much within the stats that you mentioned earlier, right? Users often complain, I'm sure we've all heard that, about the difficulty in facilitating these transactions. And so we needed a nice, clean way of enabling them to come and transact with those one-off vendors. But yet, we had the constraint that we still need to be compliant. We still have a P2P process to run, like many of us here in this room, I'm sure.
And you're still Roche.
And we're still Roche. We're big, we're complex. That's just who we are. So we set about finding the right partner. So what did that mean? What were the must-have requirements? It had to be compliant, I've just mentioned it. It needed to leverage our existing P2P process. We didn't want to redo everything. And we were also very busy deploying our suite. And this was in the middle of this. We wanted it to be tax compliant. It needs to respect AML laws. And it also needs to be agile enough to handle the complexity I've just mentioned. Also, that's on the compliance side, but it must work. It must work for the end user. It must be a good user journey. And so it had to be global, it had to be simple, it had to be able to handle different levels, different types of configurations to adapt to the situations. It had to be automated, and also it had to greatly increase the speed that we had. And so the good news is we found that in Candex. So Candex really enables us an easy, fast, compliant way for large companies like Roche, really, to make purchases from small one-time vendors.
Excellent. So the way that it works, I mean, how can Candex fit into this complicated beast that's Roche with all of their countries, all their systems, all their divisions, is we get set up as a vendor, like any other vendor, and we do it once per country, and then we invoice Roche on behalf of any little vendor to get money out of Roche, and we pay the little vendor for them so that they don't have to. And that's sort of the basic premise of how Candex works. And within that framework, there's a lot of configuration that we can do to support different needs, different rules, different limits, based on what division it is, based on what country it is, based on even by certain vendors, different characteristics that we can put in, which allow us to adapt to the complexity of a Roche. So the way that it works is Roche started with Ariba and actually switched to GEP during our journey together, but we set up as a punch-out catalog in GEP, and we can really support any e-procurement system, and there's several ways we can deliver Candex even not through an e-procurement system. But most of our clients use an e-procurement system of some type. We set up as a catalog. The user will go in, click Buy from Candex, and this page that you see here is what the user at Roche will see when they have a tailspend purchase. So they choose from Roche's category tree, they choose the right category. Even what's available is controllable. They put in a description of what it is they want to buy, so fix the centrifuge, and then an email of the vendor that they want to pay, and the amount that requires authorization, so 10,000 euros or 15,000 Polish zlotys or whatever it is. The requester will click checkout, it'll take that shopping cart, it'll go back into GEP. The requester will then complete all the details of that requisition. And then it'll follow this workflow here. And this is just the normal standard P2P workflow. And so a user will go fill out information out, the PO will go to Candex. As soon as we get the PO, we email that centrifuge repair person. That centrifuge repair person will then accept Roche's standard PO terms that they had given us for that country. They'll then invoice us, and we convert the invoice into Roche, deliver it one-to-one against the PO. It follows standard acceptance procedures that Roche has in place, and then the payment will go to us, and as soon as we get it, we pay that vendor. And what's super cool about this process is when you sort of go to get it approved at Roche, which is not an easy task, a lot of people have to say yes. You know, finance people have to say yes. Third-party risk management people have to say yes. IT people have to say yes. Procurement leadership has to say yes. And by leaving sort of everything as your existing methodology, you might have to talk to them for a while. You might have to spend an hour with each constituency, you know, explaining how it works and getting into the details and asking the challenging tax questions and answering them. But ultimately, they feel very comfortable because it's all of their standard controlled processes that are in play. And of course, we give great reporting on all of the activity, 100 columns of data about every order, every vendor, and every payment. We also collect diversity status, so it gives a lot of great information, and this is accessible in real time. For the controls, since that's a very core part of what Candex does, these are some of the controls that we work on with Roche and our other clients to make sure that it meets their needs. So our clients can set a strict payment limit on what's allowed to be paid through Candex. What is tail spend? It's sort of a fundamental question that we work on with you. And so you set a payment limit. It could be 100,000 euros per year. It could be 100,000 euros per year or 20,000 per order. We want to really meet the rules of where you want procurement involved and where real negotiations need to occur. We use your purchasing terms. So Roche gives us their PO terms. These are different in many different ways around the world, even by category sometimes. We load those up, so every vendor that's getting paid will have to agree to the right terms, which meets the compliance requirements of a typical organization. You can set which categories you want to make available. You can turn off the categories that you don't want to be available. We also can add many checkbox verifications. We can add questionnaires. All these different types of activity, but I think the most important part of it for everybody is that all purchases through us will follow a full P2P process, and it follows that process in a highly automated way for what used to be the most annoying part of your managing vendors, onboarding. All that goes away. And of course, the cost of entry is that every vendor scans against all the industry-leading sanctions lists and follows all the industry-leading AML screening procedures. If you don't have that, you're not going to get Roche as a client. So those are some of the basics. So now I'm going to pass it back to Martin, who's going to talk a little bit about implementation.
And by the way, the reporting we build into our BI, just as an add-on to what you were saying. So it complements nicely what we run in any way, and so it's blended in. It blends in quite nicely. So you might be wondering at this point, how did we go about implementing Candex? Well, fairly conventionally, we started off with a pilot. And so small group out of Switzerland, we validated a few things. Was it accepted by the end users? What were their reactions? Did it work for them? Can they walk through that process flow chart that you saw? And also, how did that work out with the vendors? And the vendors usually, I think, are, and the numbers are there to prove it. It works very well. All they need to provide to get started is an email, which is obviously, all of them will have. We also did some validation around what it would take us to bring in Candex, as we would with any solutions, bring them into the family and see how it would work. And in this case, because it's a punch-out, it's something that we could do pretty much out of the box. We also then, what we did, and I think this is the key strategic bit, we built in Candex as a service as part of the package that you were getting if you were getting the suite. So which meant that if we, as part of the global template, you go to deploy a suite, you look at what the inherited vendor masters are, and what we did is we looked at the Candex rules that we were going to apply in the future. So you look at the vendor master, filter through, and you're left with a ton of smaller vendors, one-off vendors sometimes. What it does with Candex is it enables us to not onboard them at all. So it speeds up the deployment of the suite. And so that's how we've worked with Candex. And overall, we pay a lot of attention to trying to make sure they fit into our strategy, and they did on the rollouts, and they do on an ongoing basis as well. So it's tens of thousands gone. And so Candex has a very, very good footprint. This is what you see there is the footprint they have to support Roche. But so on the ones that the markets we already have, the ones coming up, and the ones planned. But I think it's much bigger than that, right?
Yeah, so we can support currently about 50 countries. And what it means for us to support a country is we have a local Candex entity in that country. So Candex Mexico would be onboarded as a vendor to Roche in Mexico, and Candex Singapore in Singapore, and Candex Norway in Norway. And then we're always invoicing locally on behalf of any little vendor. We get the money from Roche, and then we'll pay from Candex local to wherever, and handle all the taxation issues and complexities as a result of that structure. So for every purchase that Roche makes, they get a local vendor always, which is what makes AP like us a lot.
And I would add is, as far as I know anyway, it's fairly unique to Candex. This is why Candex stand in the market in a way that's fairly, it stands apart and above some other solutions because you have that ability to do that.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting, but it's one of the reasons it took us so long to get Candex rolling is it takes sometimes a year to open each one of these countries, and you have to work on a lot of them, and you're not interesting to a company like Roche unless you're in a certain number of countries. And so for our whole existence, it's been, open new countries, and once you get to about 50, it's enough to sort of keep everybody busy, but we're still trying to open as many as we can, and you can see it's quite a nice footprint that we have active with Roche, and we're working on quite a few, and almost all of our clients, the goal is to be everywhere in the world.
Ideally. You might be thinking at this point, what makes it limitless? I think it's fairly obvious, but just to go through it, it's simplicity and speed. Really, that is what we're after here, because we think it will drive the internal demand. So requesters can really engage their vendors simply and immediately. It's touchless, yet it is compliant. It's sort of the best of both worlds. It's really all purchases go for the PO system, as Jeremy described, and really it's fully automated and then reportable. It's transparent, that's the point. So we get those data points, even though it is a separate system, and it goes into our data lake. It works globally, we've just talked about it. And we have vendors which are much happier, especially the smaller ones who don't want to engage deeply with Roche, but don't need to. That's the point. And our stakeholders as well are able to really go and self-serve on those low-value amounts or at a lower frequency of engagements with some of the smaller suppliers. So it's been a journey. We've been busy doing that, but it's really starting to pay back now, and we have that really as part of our stack in terms of our technologies, but also as a way of addressing that tail spend. So what you saw with Nick and Kevin in the previous presentation, if you were there, this is really at the tail spend of it.
Yeah, and maybe before we go into questions, you could talk about, as you implemented Candex in all these different countries, how easy was it to implement us versus other technologies that you've gone through implementation projects for?
So without being specific around the type of technologies, it's a bit like deploying a supplier that has an existing punch-out that you've connected to already. But there is some of the work that is required that is important to think about is when is Candex applicable? That's the first bit. So which categories, what spend thresholds as a unique transaction, and what cumulative spend thresholds as well. That you can vary them by country or you can hold them on a global basis, but you have to be prepared to go and work that out on a market-by-market basis.
And I think that's a very good point, because a lot of the difficulty in rolling Candex isn't the technical difficulty. You turn on the punch-out. It's the when do we want to use it? What are the rules? How are we going to do the change management? And these are things that are always difficult when you roll out a technology and you have a giant company and you want people to actually use it. Thanks for that. Now, we had planned, a lot of these are always more interesting when people ask questions. We were sort of surprised at the end that we had the QR methodology of questions. So I don't know if that will work as well. But I think you guys all were shown a QR code. Did anyone ask any questions? All right.
Okay, good.
I was nervous we wouldn't have any questions.
I was preparing to start dancing like the previous one.
I'm going to have to ask Martin to ask me questions.
Good.
Okay, great. We can start off with this most recent one, or wherever you want to.
Oh, there's a lot of.
Yep, there's
How
a couple
many
of them.
ERPs do you have? That's not an easy question. I don't even know if you can count that high.
We have many. But we're on a journey to ensure that we're moving to one global instance. So that answers the question of hopefully in both ways. You can do it on a single instance, you can do it on multiple instances as well. That's definitely possible.
Excellent. The second question, how do you earn money at Candex? So basically, there's a transaction fee similar to like a credit card. It's usually about 3%. And when a user goes to that punch-out page, which we had showed earlier, there's two boxes, you pay and vendor gets. And if your requester enters it in a you pay, the vendor will basically get 3% less than what's in that box, or your requester could enter it in the vendor gets box, in which case you would pay the fee yourself and it would request an authorization for 3% extra. That's really the only revenue stream of Candex, is the difference between those two boxes. So there's no ongoing cost or anything like that.
Let me add a bit to that. That means that to get going with Candex, they have to put their trust in you as much as you in them, because you're not going to pay them a fee. So that's one thing. So they have a vested interest in staying along with you once a solution is launched. Candex is not something you can dream up of as a stakeholders if you do not know it's available. So that's another part of the equation, and a recipe for success is making sure that it's built into an overall strategy, but also that you go to your end users, making sure that they're aware that Candex exists once. Once they know about it, usually they'll go back to it. And then the last thing I'll add on the fee side of things is an interesting exercise is to work out how much do you think it costs to onboard a supplier. Like actually, how long? What are time study? How many steps? What's the full process? And then try and equate that to an amount, and then you'll see potentially what you could be saving using Candex at that point.
I think you made a very good point, and it's something we strongly believe in. I hate the software pricing model, which is pay a ton and pray people use it, and you're just paying anyway. And with this, we only make money if you're happy and you use it more. So it sort of aligns interests much better than other tech companies. But thanks for bringing that up. This one, Candex seems a very powerful tool. I agree.
Of course you would.
What if a supplier already exists? We often do like vendor deactivation strategies with you as part of the change management. Once you get comfortable, we sort of look at every vendor last year that got less than a certain amount of money. And we work together to try and, in sort of vast tranches, reduce your vendor master. And so...
Let me add to that as well that you can do a lookup against your preferred supplier list. You don't want your preferred suppliers to be transactable via Candex. That's one of the controls that is put in place and is doable. So Roche has many preferred suppliers, as you all have, and so that's prevented. And at that point, you should be redirected to the most appropriate buying channel.
But there's more to this question, which is it still valuable if onboarding is already done? And I think a lot of our clients try and get rid of the noise in their vendor master. But if somebody is in there, they usually have gone through quite a process to get put in there, and you would use that vendor directly, not through Candex, generally speaking. The other one, next question is, what if vendors reject the terms or wish to negotiate terms? We usually try and explain to the vendor through our support process that that's a bad idea for this amount of money involved and that they should just take the standard ones. But if they really want to negotiate the terms, we would then send them back to Roche to negotiate a custom signed contract. Whether Roche wants to do that for the amount of money would be really up to Roche.
We may not. We may also, and if you're in that position, and if you've done that time study, you can, fine, do you want to get paid in, do you want to start the transaction in 3 months, or do you want to start it in 5 days?
Yeah. So sometimes it just needs a strong body from Roche telling them, don't do this.
But at that point, I would say, at that point, we've failed if we get to that point, because you lose a lot of the efficiency if you're having to get to discussing T's and C's with a specific supplier. So ideally, we don't get to that.
Yeah. Okay, so did Roche show true collaboration, creative thinking as the product developed? I would have to say yes. And it's not just because we're on stage together. Roche,
thanks, though.
Roche pioneered with us because they do so much in Switzerland. They have an import problem, for example, which I think is one of the best features we've gotten from Roche. And they said, well, we can't use this a lot unless we can do imports because we bring a lot in from Germany and France. And so we worked together with them on designing, developing our importation feature, which allowed transactions to occur with an importation as part of it without having something in the middle getting in the way that confused everybody. And that was a very long project to develop, and to their credit, they even engaged outside consultants to work with us to verify it, that it would work. And that product has since become available to everybody, and it works with really any economic union. So I think that's one example of it, but there's quite a few others, including currency exchange capabilities that we added, and then a lot of random configurations. And I would also add, not to throw too much on the list, of your compliance folks asking for weird things like extra verifications that they wanted done that weren't in our standard process that we then were able to bring to everybody because we had to do it. So they can be pretty painful to work with sometimes, not Martin, but sort of the back office. But generally, we take those types of things with a positive attitude because everybody likes it in the end when you add that capability.
Yeah, just to add a comment on that, I've seen the Candex client list is fairly extensive, and some of you here may be part of that, but there is a correlation between how complex the organization is and their pickup, typically, of the solution. And so for us, therefore, it works well.
So there's quite a few more questions, and we're probably running very short on time. There is a small implementation cost, but I don't think anyone would think it's material. It does work with no P2P solution in place. But if you have one, we like to use it. So there's ways to deliver us as a standalone. And that's something that we can talk to you about if you reach out. Do you integrate to Coupa, Ivalua, any e-procurement system we can work with? As long as we can get a PO, everything can be automated. What is the partnering aspect other than the commercials? I think it's sort of helping work through all of the noise. How are changes to an order and returns handled? Returns are fairly rare because our invoice gets accepted before the payments are made and the timing. But if there is one, we would work with them and either reimburse the transaction at no cost in the other direction, which really almost never happens, or they would just redo the good and send it again. Order updates work with Candex, so if someone needs to increase the amount of a PO, that will carry through to our system to the vendor as normal. We also support tolerances, and how do you avoid too much configuration, customization, rather than sticking to your core capabilities? I think the configurations that we do are for our core capabilities. So I wouldn't say we're adding things outside of it, but rather adding things that let you use the core functionality, because if you didn't, someone would say no.
Yeah.
So with that, I think that's enough questions. So thank you all so much, and thank you, Martin. This was great.